Ohio in the United States, where it is presently 9 in the morning Eastern Time. And I am honored to be a part of the MILE program here dealing with change in the 21st century. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the things that I've been researching for the last 5 or more years that culminated in a doctoral thesis and then a best-selling book. That book is what this seminar is based off of, and there we go. The book is The Open Organization, as was mentioned in the introduction. Basically, where I started with a question of what is it that makes organizations more successful than others? That was the thesis question that started this whole journey to where I am today. I wanted to know what it is organizations compete in an industry. And so I started that culminated in this side. The reality for my preferred future was deciding where we are. Now, some call me a high employee strategic foresight. And one series of that I take to different events. And really is with the question I ask all the time, what if increase? What if back in November I was actually in Arabia and I was talking to some government officials there, and I said, what if the global oil markets crash? What do we do? What if the global markets increase? What do we do? What if? How will certain future events impact us? How will they disrupt us or create opportunities for us? So this is really the stepping off point. If you come away with anything from this seminar today, it's this question: what if? And fill in the blank. Fill in the blank with whatever is facing you or your organization at the time that you ask that question. So I ask the question, what does your future look like? What technologies, what skills, what processes, even what disruptions will you experience into the future? And really, the future is undetermined at this time because we have not arrived at that moment. But there is one word of caution, and I get this all the time. Can you really predict the future? Well, an economist by the name of Niels Bohr said that prediction is very difficult, especially about the future. We cannot know the future, but we can make certain assumptions of the nature of the future based on certain knowable and observable trends which translate into assumed potential futures. So let me give you an example of what I'm speaking of. What I found was that businesses today, in general, are nothing more than broken. The way we do business in the past is changing, and the old ways are not always as effective in a new century. So this set me on this fundamental journey of asking questions: what makes these organizations successful, and so on. And what we found is that in the beginning of the 21st century, that we entered into a time of global upheaval, that markets were changing, that we were having problems economically around the globe, that we're all attached together, we're in a global economy now, and that these certain disruptions were causing issues in the marketplace. And that brought me to the realization that we are actually witnessing one of the greatest shifts in organizational leadership since Frederick Taylor adopted the scientific management approach in the 1890s. We're no longer able to compete with 19th and 20th century ideals in this new century. I would say that we're not going to get rid of all of those ideas from the 19th and 20th century. However, many of these ideals that are playing out for us right now are significant enough to say that some of those ideals will go away. So here's what I mean. In 1989, a Harvard Business School professor by the name of Charles Handy predicted that by the year 2000, that less than half of the global workforce would be in proper full-time jobs. In other words, they would be working 9 to 5, 8 to 5, whatever the organizational time clock is. They would be working in those jobs. They would go physically to a location and work full-time. Now, what we found is that in the year 2011, the Gallup Corporation did a poll, and they noted that that number that wasn't actually less than 50%, it was actually more like 40% of the industrialized world was already in full-time employment. So we actually, by the year 2011, we're at 40%. Now, as we play this trend out, which we see this actually taking place right now, it's estimated by the year 2040 that less than 30% of the global market will be in full-time jobs. Now, imagine that, if you will, right now, that you as an organizational leader, if you are operating with 30% less employees in your office space than you do presently today. That is a significant amount of loss to the job market. And, you know, I jokingly say that even Batman needs extra money, but in reality, what we're looking at is the rise of the part-time worker and the rise of the consultant, which is actually a role that I play. I am a business consultant, and I work for myself. Another statistic that we had to be ready to adopt was this idea that millennials are on the rise. By the year 2025, which is not too far away, as you well know, 11 years or so, 75% of your workforce will be millennials. This means that they will be in leadership roles, mid-level and greater. And so we have to be aware that everything is shifting. The number of employees that we have and the demographic of the employee is shifting. And again, this is globally. This is not just an American problem. This is a global issue that we're dealing with. So let me give you an example of what's changing. The world's largest taxi cab company actually owns no vehicles. And we know this organization as Uber. And it may not be available in all countries, but I know it's spreading through the globe right now. The world's most popular media owner actually creates no content, and we know this as Facebook. The most valuable retailer in the world has no inventory, and we know it as Alibaba. And finally, the world's largest accommodation provider, in other words, hotels, motels, and so forth, they own no real estate, and we know that company as Airbnb. So as we're seeing the shift, we're moving away from widgets, and we're moving toward a thinking economy, a knowledge economy, where we're actually making money through services and knowledge rather than widgets and hard work with our muscle. So that is some things that are coming. Now let's go back to this idea of the workforce shrinking. And in fact, we're finding that by the year 2025, which is again not too far away, that we're looking at 50% of the workforce will be what we call freelancers or consultants. Now what that means is that instead of having full-time employees, that we will have employees that are at need. In other words, when we have the need for them, we go out and we engage those employees or consultants, and when that need is over with, we lose those employees back into the freelance market. So this could mean that individuals would actually work for multiple corporations and could even work for competitors at times. So this raises some other questions. How do we engage this type of workforce, this consultant or freelance workforce, knowing that they may be working for our competitor at some time. Again, another disruption, another time to ask the question, what if? What if this actually happens? What if we are at a point where we have 50% of our population is a consultant? So what does this mean in essence? Well, it means that the way we do business, the way we go to work is changing. In fact, I call this the rise of the distributed workforce. Where are we working? Are we working in a typical traditional office space? Many of us as leaders and who have gone through the stages of the organization and have arisen to the corporate level, to the C-suite. Many of us are looking at those corner offices, and I'm here to tell you that that opportunity is diminishing, that the ideal of the corner office probably will not be around in the next 10, 15, 20 years. In fact, what I'm saying is that we're looking at the rise of the Coffice, which I simply take coffee house and office and mix them together. We are becoming a globally dispersed cloud working society. We're working from a distance through the internet to create solutions for our clients, and many times our clients are not just the end users of product, but they're internal to our company as well. So global advances in technology, just like the technology we're using today, I know I'm speaking to people all around the world. I've been receiving emails from people in different parts of the world, from Africa to the Middle East to Europe and the United States alike, and Australia. All the continents are listening today, and it's all because of technology through the internet, which is webinars, technology of microphones and video and all of that is causing us to reevaluate the need for offices. And in fact, I have coined the terminology cloud workers. We will become what I call cloud workers. And clouding is nothing more than describing the attribute of working remotely to access information and knowledge and clients and your colleagues at work through the internet. This is central to the idea of where we're headed as a dispersed economy, that cloud working will be central to how we interact, how we communicate. In fact, I know Skype, for example, is working on a technology where you don't even need to know my native language, or I need to know your native language for us to communicate through Skype, because the technology is evolving in such a way that one day I can have a Skype conference with someone in another country that does not speak English, and my Skype side actually translates it into English, and I can hear that English in my ear, and I can speak back in English, and it translates it back into the native tongue that is being heard on the other side. So cloud working and technology go hand in hand, and they are what are propelling us into this 21st century workspace where 30% of us are left working in full-time employment. The rest of us are freelance and consultants like myself. So let's talk about this technology a little bit more. In fact, I call it technology disruption, or disruption by technology. And in fact, we are a global workforce right now. Just by the nature of me speaking to you today in whatever respective part of the world you're in right at this moment, evening or morning, it does not matter, we are dealing with technology in such a way that it creates a global community. In fact, 20 years ago, we didn't even know what impact a smartphone would have on us today. In fact, the smartphone has disrupted everything from the way we shop for groceries to the way that we contact a taxi cab or look for a place to eat for lunch. The way that we interact with technology and technology interacts with us has disrupted us completely. And I would go on to say that if you own a website, just by the nature of having a website, you are already a global corporation. And what I mean by that is that if I knew how, or the search terminology, I could search through Google or other search engines, and I can find your website, and I'm here in the United States, in Ohio, in the state of Ohio, and I could find your website in another part of the world and contact you. That, by nature, makes you a global corporation at that point. We no longer have our borders that are confined by the neighborhood that we live in, the region that we live in, the city, the country, the hemisphere that we live in. We are no longer bound by those geographic boundaries. We are now in a disruptive phase of technology. So let's talk about some ways that technology is probably going to affect the 21st century organization. We are actually in a phase where technology changes the way we interact in healthcare, in communication, in manufacturing, in so many different ways. And in fact, this is just a representation, this picture, of one of the ways that we are being disrupted by technology just in healthcare. So I asked the question, and of course you cannot answer back, but I'm just going to pose the rhetorical question, what is this? Well, the answer is this is a three-dimensional printer. This is a mechanism that takes different materials and creates a product out of this by three-dimensionally printing it. This, in essence, opens the door to what I call the maker society. And of course, let's go back to the healthcare example. We are actually creating different body parts, if you will, using some similar technology. And this is just, again, a graphic representation of what the future may look like. Imagine, if you will, that one day you're having some heart issues and you need a heart transplant. Instead of going on a transplant list, you provide the biology department at the hospital with some of your DNA, and they put that into a machine, and the machine prints out a heart that is viable within your system. There's no need for rejection drugs. There's no need for massive amounts of recovery time, all because the printer is able to create a duplicate of your heart. Now, this also opens up some other questions like ethics and morality and other things. And so we have these issues coming that we need to start dealing with, because these are disruptions in the way we think and act and interact with society and with technology. Now, another example of how three-dimensional printing is set to change just in the way of healthcare, we find this example of a prosthesis that was made for a guy who had an open skull injury. He got injured, and they designed this to implant under his skin to cover up his brain so that he could live properly. And there's other techniques and uses for 3D printing, like cast systems for the hand. And we're even finding them making objects like eyeglasses, just using a three-dimensional printing technique. Now, let me ask you a question. What would happen if we're able to three-dimensionally scan something like your foot? Now, I know this seems a little strange, but what if you could three-dimensionally scan your foot and then dial up Amazon or Zappos or some other favorite website that you utilize, and you can upload the dimensions of your foot to that website and have them download information to your three-dimensional printer so that you could print your shoes out there in your office or in your basement or wherever you have this three-dimensional printer. Now, believe it or not, this is actually New Balance shoes that have been printed on a 3D printer. And imagine what that would do for retailers. Imagine what that would do to the market for shipping. If you were in a shipping business, what kind of disruptions would that bring if people were able to just download the product they wanted, a shirt or shoes, their cell phone, a television? What would happen to the manufacturing companies? What would happen to the distributing companies? These are disruptions where we have to ask the question, what if? Now there's another question, if any of you are legally minded, in other words, you're interested in law, the question now becomes, who owns this shoe? And some would argue that you own the right to use this shoe, but you don't physically own the shoe because you printed it out. And so there's all these legal questions about copyrights and trademarks and all these other things. And in fact, what's to say that this shoe company, when printing it out, can decide, well, if you're going to use our shoe, we're going to put an advertisement along the side, and let's say it's an advertisement for a product you don't believe in or morally or socially don't want to support. So there's so many questions that we have to start asking when it comes to the future of technology and how it's going to disrupt. And this is really the essence of the 21st century organization. How will we be disrupted, and what do we do about it? So my thought is, what if rather than fighting this technology, you find a way to make it useful to you? So if you're a distribution company or you're a manufacturer or something, why don't you buy up these machines and put them in communities where here in the U.S. you used to be able to go to a pharmacy or a drugstore and get your pictures developed in an hour. What if you could go to the pharmacy or the drugstore or the grocery store or the market and there's a computer there and you can download your shoes and they print them out, or you can order them via telephone or internet and you go down to the market on your way to buy groceries and you pick up your shoes. So there's all of these different ways that we can actually take that disruption and use it to our benefit and engage entrepreneurship in a different and new way, in a very useful way. Now, one other point I want to make about this disruption that's coming. What if we could print houses or cars with this technology? What would that do to the housing market? What if we could bring inexpensive housing to the masses just using three-dimensional technology? Now, this is a mock-up of a house that's being developed through an organization using 3D printing, and it's like a jigsaw puzzle, a three-dimensional puzzle, in that these parts are printed and then they're taken to the site and put together 1, 2, 3, 4, in order until you have a house in place. So these are some disruptions that are coming just from this little technology right now. What if every house around the globe or every neighborhood or every community had access to a 3D printer? How would this change the economy that we're in? How might this change the way we shop? How would it change the way we buy and sell and recycle products? Would that change our traveling habits? Would that change our shipping habits? Would it affect oil prices and gas prices globally? The question is, how will this technology that is real, it really exists, how will this disrupt or change our business model today? Now, one other thing that we need to think about is this idea of big data. Big data is coming. Big data is simply mega computers that are storing a massive amount of information. I call this a knowledge warehouse. This is another thing. How do we interact with data? What do we need to know? How do we make sure that we don't get overwhelmed with data? That's certainly something we need to start thinking about. How will technology change the way we design products, everyday products? How will it change that? These are disruptions that could affect us in many different ways. Again, go back to the example of the smartphone. 20 years ago, we hardly knew what a cell phone was, much less a smartphone. And look at the ways that that technology has changed, the way that we interact globally today. Some other things that we're looking at is the idea of virtual reality and bioconnectivity. What would happen if we went to work just by strapping on a visor and we had a teleconference like we're having right now via 3D? These are all disruptions that we need to start thinking about. And of course, we have this idea of wearables, wearable technology. This is an example of like a smart watch. But what if wearable technology became a little more interesting? What if it was just a band around your wrist that projected a holograph onto your arm? How would that change the market? What if we could three-dimensionally print this band around our arm, how would that change the way we interact with the world? And then, of course, we need to consider robotics. Now, some might say, well, robotics is too far away to be useful to us, but I would argue that we're already looking at self-driving cars here in the U.S., and in fact, some states in the U.S. have made it legal for you to actually interact with a smart car or a robotic car, if you will. And this is just a picture from Regis. Regis is a office supply company. In other words, they supply office space around the world for you to have meetings. What if you could get in a car and have a meeting as you were going to another meeting? There's all of these disruptions that are coming, and we need to think about realistically what this might mean to us. Again, what if? Now, I mentioned earlier that the organization of the future is going to be more dispersed than it's ever been. We're dealing with a dispersed workforce, and it's going to require us as leaders to have new mindsets, new approaches, new ideals when it comes to technology and how we interact with that. Some companies do not allow their employees to bring their own technology to work, their smartphones or their laptops or whatever. This is going to change the way that we lead individuals in our organization and how we dictate to them what technologies they can interact with or not. Organizations now are beginning to evolve into a dispersed, flat, maybe agile, some of them are self-led organizations. This is very much the ideal that comes out of my book, The Open Organization, where I'm talking about how you make this happen. We're dealing with generational shifts and the mix of different age groups that are working together. And so what's emerging is a new organization and a new way to lead people. Now the problem is many look at this idea of dispersed and flat and they say this is chaos. In fact, the mythology is that many of us that are classically trained leaders will say that this is chaos, there's no rules, there's no structure, and the reality is that an open, flat organization, a dispersed organization is far from the idea of chaos. In fact, there's very much a structure in play when we're dealing with this. It's a very complex ecosystem, very much like the current top-down systems are today. A flat organization, a dispersed organization, is equally as complex, and it very much has structure and complexity. In fact, the benefits of being dispersed, the benefits of being agile, is that our organizations become less rigid and more flexible than the counterparts of the past. It's this flexibility that is intriguing and is what's causing organizations today to be more successful, because they're able to compete quickly in an ever-evolving, complex environment. And the most distinguishable attribute of the flat organization is the lack of layers of administration and bureaucracy that divide the more traditional organizations. This system by nature is very much holistic. It engages people with the whole of their being by restoring and extending work as a community and as life. It is the future. All the social collaboration and co-working tools are already in place, and they're getting better every day. But here's one other attribute about the organization of the future. It must be scalable. It must be able to expand and contract with the market situation. Whether the market is increasing or it's retreating, we need to be able to have this scalability, which and scalability actually requires constant monitoring and adjustment within the system, which means we're engaging big data in new and interesting ways. And so scalability becomes one of the main attributes of why we look at changing the system within our organization. It allows us to interact with the environment in a more holistic and natural way, It allows us to take head on the problems that are coming at us, and it allows us to grow our revenues without increasing fixed costs necessarily. So how do we grow our company? Well, we engage the freelancer, we engage the consultant. We're dealing with a organization that only has 30% of the workforce in that organization is actually full-time employees. That means that we grow and contract from market needs by utilizing those different options of freelancers and consultants. The other attribute of the new organization of the future is this idea of delivering happiness. Now, Tony Hsieh is the CEO of Zappos, and he really has pushed this idea of delivering happiness. Our organizations of the future are optimizing for happiness by focusing on creating happy environments rather than creating wealth. Now, what I mean by that is, because this is counter to our traditional training, is that organizational structures are focused on how do we make the environment more comfortable for the employee. Because what we're learning psychologically is that happiness increases productivity, it certainly increases and stimulates creativity, and it makes employees more willing to take risks. And what we're finding is that these organizations, at least in the West here, we're finding that these organizations that are optimized for happiness have less rate of employees calling in sick, that we find that the employees are more engaged and make better decisions. And in fact, what we're finding is not only are the organizations more productive, but their bottom lines are a lot stronger as they open up this idea of happiness. Now, part of that delivering happiness idea is how do we make decisions? Decision making is passed down to the rank and file of the organization, and here's the main reason why. It is impossible for a leader of any organization to be everywhere all the time. What we're discovering is that complex, agile organization systems require individuals who are willing to take risks and make decisions. This requires leadership that is willing to embrace and bestow explicit decision-making powers to the members of the organization. So decision-making in an open organization context is about workers that come together through technology specifically to collaborate and to solve the complex issues that are facing the organization or the market. This requires a social collaborative code, which I'll talk about here in a moment, where there's shared responsibilities and behaviors. So decision-making is given to the employees. Now, let me give you one extreme example of how decision-making can impact an organization. When I was writing my book, The Open Organization, I did a case study on a tech firm in San Francisco, California. And what I discovered was that this tech firm very much empowered their employees to make critical decisions. And in one case, there was a very large corporation that was utilizing their system, and they had a technology glitch that caused them to shut down. They could not do business. It was costing them millions of dollars every moment they were down. And so they had just paid their annual maintenance fee to this technology company, and it was something in the neighborhood of $250,000, $250,000 US. And so the tech that was working with the company recognized that it was the company's fault, that they actually caused the problem for their client, and so the tech said to them, not only are we going to fix this problem, but we're going to go ahead and refund back to you the $250,000 that we just got from you out of goodwill. Now, many of you are probably sitting back and saying, oh my gosh, I cannot imagine giving back that much money. But here's what happened. The goodwill that came out of that story, because it went global, it was out in all the newspapers and on blogs and everything, the goodwill that came out of that story allowed other people to come to them, and they actually made more money by giving back $250,000 than had they kept the money and made the client mad, because the client probably would have gone away at some point. So decision making is a very key attribute of this idea of being an open organization. So as I head toward the end of this discussion, I wanted to let you know that open organizations are very much focused on principles, and some of those principles involve the core values. What are the values of the organization? What do we believe? What do we hold to be true? What do we aspire to? And then we have this idea of first principles. This is a list of things that do not change in the company. They're the values that do not change. They're the questions that we ask every time we need to make a decision, and so on. And out of that grows a governance. Now, a governance, for those who are in public corporations, is different than what I'm talking about here. A governance in this aspect is very much the rules of engagement that the employee is allowed to interact with to make decisions like giving back $250,000 to a client. And finally, we have what we call an organizational constitution, which is very much like the governance. In fact, those words can be interchanged, but it's again a set of rules on how we attain corporate value, how we make decisions, and how we engage our first principles. So now here's the question that I will close with. How? How do we change? How do we do this? Well, first of all, and this has to happen from the very top, board members, CEO, everyone has to desire the change. They have to desire or want this change to happen. They have to want to embrace the ideals of a 21st century organization. We have to have a workforce that's teachable. We are entering into a knowledge society, a knowledge economy, and so we must be teachable. We must be willing to grow. Our knowledge base and our skill base has to change if we're going to compete in a new reality. And finally, as leaders, we have to be willing to empower people. We have to be willing to engage them in the place that they work. After all, who knows better the job than the person who's doing it? So my ideal is to always say to leaders, hire the right people, give them the right tools, and get out of their way so that they can do their job. That is empowerment. And that is one of the most significant things that we can do to compete in the 21st century. Now, as I close out here, I just wanted to remind you that I do have 2 books out there. If you're interested in more of what I'm talking about, you can check out these books online through Amazon, The Open Organization, and Organization 3.0, or you can go to my website at maximumchange.com and access those books as well. And that concludes my portion of this seminar, and I will turn it back over to the MILE organization, and I'll be happy to accept your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Folks, we are now open for the question and answers. If you have any questions, you could put it in the question box, or you could raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on your console, so please click on it, and you will have a chance to speak directly with the speakers. So let me go straight to the question box. First one from Mr. Paul Creasley. The question is, thank you for a very thought-provoking presentation. Even in the disruptive future environment that you so eloquently describe, it seems that the people and the organization they might populate are aligned with something. What is it? How can I discover my current alignment? What if I don't like it?
I'm sorry, alignment with what they're doing right now? I didn't quite hear the whole question.
The organizations that they populated are aligned with something. What is it? In fact, they're asking, what is it, and how can I discover my current alignment? And what if I don't like it?
Well, the assumption is you don't like the alignment that you see coming or see before you. the question is not so much what is it, but what are you actually doing right now and what's working. My thought is we're not trying to reinvent the organization so much as we're trying to reinvent the way that we interact with employees and the marketplace. So to create alignment in that, it may mean that we have to let go of a lot of employees. Now, that is not a very flavorful idea to say I'm going to have to let go of a lot of employees. Without knowing the details of the organization, it's hard to come up with exact strategies. However, I would say you need to start with what you believe first. What are your first principles? What are your core values? And will those core values and first principles sustain you through the new realities of the marketplace? And we could say that, for example, if you're a business that relied on fax machines, and we could giggle or laugh or whatever because fax machines are few and far between, at least in the West. If you were a business that focused on fax machines as your business model, and in fact fax machines went away and you ignored the scanning technology, you're going out of business. So the question is, in that regard of alignment, is what you're doing in alignment with what technology is offering at this time? And I'll give you another example that's in the near past, and that was the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, many of us know Encyclopedia Britannica because it's a well-known book series, and it's been around for a long time. But in the 1980s, going into the 1990s, Microsoft came out with a online on a CD, the Encarta, and this technology nearly put Encyclopedia Britannica out of business. So the questions that we need to be asking is what we're doing right now is our business model in alignment with where technology and society is headed. If society is not using fax machines anymore, if society isn't using encyclopedias anymore, they're not using your widget anymore, what are you doing to stay ahead of that? And that's where that question, what if, comes in. And I hope I answered his question.
Well, thank you very much. We have callers who raise a hand. We have Brother Amr Al-Fas. Brother Amr, can you hear us? Please introduce yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, my name is Amr Al-Fas. I'm talking from Foxborough. I enjoyed the talk, really very nice one, insightful as usual. So I would like to ask Dr. Philip, what will be the impact on the future employment market? Now the technology is taking over, and this means that more jobs will be created at the Silicon Valley or the IT technology sector. So what will be the impact on the skilled laborers? And the second point is, how can we as leaders be prepared for the future? What kind of skills and traits we have to take care of?
Those are excellent questions, Amr. Thank you so much. I would say that the impact of the employment market is that we are entering into an era where employees are not engaged in a learning system. They don't have the skills necessarily that are needed for the future workforce. I know many employees that are working in traditional offices today do not understand fully the knowledge commons, big data. They don't understand webinars. They don't understand interacting with certain technologies and how do we utilize those technologies and how do we compete. What if tomorrow you lost your job? How are you going to compete? Do you know how to market yourself? Do you know how to use technology? Do you know how to use the internet? These are all skills. Some are soft skills, some are hard skills. One of the soft skills in my mind is that we need to learn how to be better communicators because we're going to be using technologies to communicate, chat boards. I really see a day where email may go away, and so we're going to be communicating in real time through texting and chat boards and different technologies like WhatsApp and other things like that. And so those are some skills that we need to engage in now to prepare for the future. How do we prepare as leaders? Again, it's the same thing, training. What are we doing to train ourselves? Myself, I'm sitting here at my desk at home. I work from home, and I have a stack of about 9 books on my desk. I am a voracious reader. I'm reading all the time. Of course, I'm also a writer, so I'm writing. But my point is, it's how we educate and prepare ourselves now for the soft skills and the hard skills that are going to matter. As leaders, we need to be aware of what's going on in the industry, what's going on in the world, how technologies are impacting things. We have to have our eyes wide open, our ears wide open. I am constantly reading news articles, blog articles, trying to figure out what industries are doing. I'm asking this question, what if, all the time, and I'm engaging in the process of learning on a daily basis. Thank you, Amr.
Perfect. Thanks, Dr. Philip.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brother Amr, for the question. And let me move to another caller, one of our regular callers, Dr. Muhammad Faridi, Dr. Muhammad Rashad Faridi. Please introduce yourself, sir, once again, and ask the question.
Hello, I'm Dr. Faridi. I'm a professor at the business school in Riyadh, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Thank you, Dr. Phillips, for your great presentation. Sorry, I've got like a choppy voice because I'm a bit struck by the flu. So my question is that from the business perspective, the business school perspective, the change of the models, the sharing economy and collaborative consumptions taking place. So you think it would be the right time for the business schools to be adaptive and be responsive to changing the curriculums according to it? And the second thought is that with the tools becoming which were specialized, like the stethoscope for the doctors or the checking your glucose, there was a device specialized by the doctor's nurse keeping it. Now it seems it's almost a commodity has been shifted to the layman, and it's a friendly usage of these medical devices. One of the things is, so you think there'll be in marketing perspective, there'll be a change of the products from the target market to a specific niche target market to a broader, as you said in your presentation, the scalability will be there. So that's my thought.
And if I could start with the latter first, this is probably where we see the rise of robotics coming in and the rise of technology, both good and bad. This certainly can affect the way that we engage different services and products in the future. For example, I don't think that doctors are going to go away. I don't believe that for a minute. However, the way that doctors treat their patients could very well change. You know, there was a video that I watched a number of years ago where they talked about insurance companies driving this idea that if you wanted cheaper insurance for health insurance, that you had to succumb to certain agreeable things, and they would install a bathroom, a toilet, if you will. And when you went to the restroom, it analyzed your body and said if you were doing things you shouldn't be doing, like smoking or drinking or eating the wrong foods, and then they would cause your, you know, rates for your insurance to go up or whatever, or they wouldn't let you have medical treatment because you weren't meeting certain agreements. So there's different things that are happening in that realm that we need to grasp a hold on that will come out of that. Now, as far as business schools are concerned, yes, I do think that we as educators, and I am a professor myself, although not currently teaching, we owe it to the future workforce to engage them with information that is going to be applicable to their new reality. Now, I'm not saying that we get rid of all of our ideas on theory and how we, you know, the Taylor theorism, a scientific management approach certainly is something we need to be aware of, and I don't think we're ever going to get rid of it fully. However, we need to understand how to communicate. We need to understand cultural gaps. How do we deal with differences between, let's say, even my culture and your culture? How do we deal with power distances when we're talking about Hofstadter and some of those other ideals from a leadership standpoint and a business standpoint? So I do think that it's up to us to talk about these. How do we engage creativity? How do we engage collaborative environments and innovation? All of that is up to us to look forward into the future, engaging foresight and strategy and all of that, so that we can be more effective educators and that they can be more effective workforce in the future.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad. Hope you feel better. Thank you for the question.
Yes.
And let me move to another quick questions. How could government controls and regulations impact the organization of the future?
Well, this is a very, very timely question because I think that we're looking at globally governments trying to figure this out as well. And I can tell you that as far as the distributed economy goes, at least here in the United States, we're having a little bit of a problem with our government recognizing what a distributed workforce means. And if I could just indulge you with an example real quick. I have a friend and a colleague who is not an American. He was not born here. And he came here on a executive transfer visa. And he was trying to re-engage his legal status. And because his company is a distributed company, he does have employees here in the U.S. and he has been growing over the last 3 years. But most of his employees are consultants and freelancers around the world. And I happen to engage with this company on a regular basis as a consultant for them. And I happen to know that the U.S. government said that they do not recognize his company as a viable company, and they do not recognize them as a executive because he's not leading a huge workforce. Now, that is true in the sense of how many full-time employees that this individual has, but as far as how many people he engages as far as consultants, they're in the hundreds. And so he's every bit a mid to large-size corporation when you look at the number of consultants and freelancers that he engages with globally. The problem is the U.S. government is not at that point where they understand remote workforce yet. Distributed economy, and so they have denied his request to continue legal status in the U.S. and in fact he has to leave, and that leaves his company with employees that he has here in limbo, and it may cause them to have to look for other work if he was not able to have a backup plan, which I believe he does. But my point is, government regulation and governments, I do not believe are keeping up with, as well as they should, the realities of the economy that's coming. What is my status when I am working from Ohio and I'm doing work for someone, let's say, in Saudi Arabia or in South Africa or wherever we have a listener from today? The point is, what is my legal status? Am I considered an employee there? Do I need to pay taxes? All of these are questions that are unanswered at this moment.
Very much. We have one last question. What about the information overload? As more and more organizations and their staff are becoming a victim of this information bandwidth, which is crunching out the productive hours, and they find their staff lacks the required time management skills to cope up with this challenge.
Well, this goes back to the question that I believe Amr was asking, how do we prepare our workforce? One of those areas is training our workforce in the area of time management. In fact, what's interesting is I'm finding that the trend is heading toward organizations that do not have work hours. Now, you might say, wait a minute, how can I be an effective business owner if my employees don't have work hours? The reality is we're not talking about 8 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 10, whatever work time frame you have. What we're finding is that we have a general agreement on when these employees are going to work, and because they have that flexibility to work in the times that work best for them, they're less likely to be disrupted by family issues or health or other things, and so time management usually works itself out. The problem is that this is not for everyone. Those that are not able to work under this environment will not be working for companies that do this. And what we're finding is that those individuals really struggle in competing because they're not able to work with the processes that the company has. So what we're finding is that employees do need to be trained, and not only do they need to be trained, but leaders need to become coaches and mentors for their workforce. In other words, they're coaching them through these problems and mentoring them in how to be effective in time management and how to work under these new ideals. And if I could just say one other thing, companies that are working under an old model, a top-down structure that's rigid and firm, it takes a long time for them to turn the ship around and to do this ideal futurist approach to leading organizations. This is not something that you just say tomorrow, okay, everyone, drop everything, we're going to do this. It takes a change in mindset, it takes training, it takes coaching, it takes a full commitment from the top down in leadership, and so there's a lot of learning and change that has to come with this future. And really that's one of the exciting things for me as an educator, that I engage in companies and helping them make these changes, and it's really exciting for me to help them help them turn on these light bulbs of ideas and to engage this process. It's not easy. It's not intuitive for us. We've been trained over hundreds of years to operate the way we do, and sometimes it's a cultural thing, sometimes it's just training and expectations, but this is something that's going to take time, and unfortunately there are businesses that are starting up today that are doing this, and they're out competing large corporations that are not there yet. So we've got to find a way to turn this corner and engage this in a little better way.
Well, thank you very much. We have one just last caller raised a hand, so let me go straight. We have Mr. Rudolph Kabutz. Rudolph, can you hear us? Could you please introduce and ask the question? Hi, Rudolph. Okay, I see. I mean, Mr. Rudolph has even posted the question, so let me read over.
Okay.
How do these concepts of open organizations apply to many who are working in global networks that collaborate on global issues way beyond the organizational boundaries?
Well, the reality is that we live in an open society. Most of us are free to associate and collaborate with anyone, and a lot of times the ideal of an open organization is outside the confines of the organizational structure. In fact, part of the definition that I engage with in open organization is that it's open not only internally but sometimes externally, and it may be in networks beyond the organizational structure. And what I mean by that is if you belong to a club or your kids belong to a school and you're interacting with people there, or maybe you're on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, and you're building networks through there and collaborating ideas. In fact, a lot of the stuff that I engage with, I collaborate with people all around the world. We talk about ideas. In fact, in a couple of hours, I'm going to be on the Leadership Roundtable video chat where we're going to collaborate, and I'm actually collaborating with people that I also compete with. And so sometimes we're even collaborating with our competition. Now, you may scratch your head and say, why would we do that? The reality is sometimes we need our competitor to be more competitive. In other words, they need us, we need them, so that we can operate in a bigger environment. I have two colleagues that I operate with, and we collaborate a lot. And sometimes, even though we compete in a way, we come together so that we can compete together to compete with bigger organizations. And so this little guy here can take on a tier 1 consulting firm because I have the brain power and the skill set and the abilities just in my little firm. So, you know, open organization is really not just an internal structure, but external as well. And thank you for that question, Rudolph.
Well, that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. I really want to thank you, Dr. Phillips, for a very, very interesting presentation. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
Not at this time, other than to say it was a pleasure to interact with you and your organization, and to the listeners. I appreciate their time, and if for some reason any of them want further information, if they just want to go to my website, MaximumChange.com, I'd be happy to engage them in answering any further questions they may have into the future.
Thank you very much once again, and I really want to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship Mile for your valuable time. And thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. We are recording it. Please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org for our upcoming webinars and to access our archives. You can also download the soft copy of this presentation that was delivered today by Dr. Phillips from community.mile.org. With that note, we'd like to end this webinar, so you all will be automatically dismissed out. You all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.